Hey everyone, it's Sylas, and this is going to be another Champion First Impressions video, and today we have Sylas or Syphilis. I'm not really quite sure, but we're going to get into it, and we're just going to take a look at his abilities. So, passive, Predicate Burst. After casting a spell, Sylas's next basic attack rolls his chains around him, damaging nearby enemies. Okay, alright, so we'll just take a look at that. Fantastic. Alright, then we move on to his Q, Chain Lash. Lashes out with his chain, damaging and slightly slowing enemies after a brief delay. The intersection of the chains detonate, applying an increased slow and damaging enemies again. Okay. And then we have W Kingslayer. Sylas lunges at a target with a powerful strike, damaging them and healing himself. If the enemy is at low health, the damage is increased. If Sylas is at low health, the heal is increased. That is a very strong heal. And then we go to his E. Sylas dashes a short distance and shields himself. For a short time, he can recast the ability to whip out his change, stunning and damaging and pulling himself to the first enemy hit. So I assume that it has to hit an enemy. I do like that it says enemy and not enemy champion, because this does mean that it can also work as terrain scaling. The fact that he does have a dash also does play into terrain scaling. And so with the way that his Q, his passive, and his W all seem to be, it does look like that this is in fact a jungler. So then we go to his R. His R is Hijack. I have been told this is a point-and-click ability. Sylas hijacks an enemy's ultimate for his own use. Enemies can use their ultimates if Sylas, whatever, can take an enemy's ultimate whenever hijack is off cooldown, but can't hijack the same enemy for a while after. So this is actually really cool. I heard rumors about a champion having this kind of an ultimate ever since I first joined League, and it's really awesome to actually finally see it on a champion, because I do think that this can be extremely powerful, especially because some team compositions are actually sculpted by like certain champions and what their ultimate can offer. For instance, like Galio, or for instance an ultimate like Camille, or for instance an Azir ultimate. So I actually think this is super insane. His kit is obviously really strong inside of the jungle. He basically has an approach that is most likely just going to be very similar to Camille in a lot of regards. As long as his ratios and his damage is up there, I assume that he's going to be able to clear relatively easy because he has so much AoE inside of his kit. I don't know what his base MS is. That's another thing that's going to have to be factored in. Obviously, outside of this, we could maybe perhaps entertain that this could be a top laner and rather than a mid laner. So I'm looking at predominantly almost surely going to be a jungle, and then after that, maybe there's an argument for being a top laner because of the execute and the sustain that he has built into him, as well as just the AoE, the lunge, and I guess maybe you could make an argument for hijack being potentially oppressive inside of certain lane matchups. But outside of that, he seems very surface level. It doesn't actually seem like he's bringing anything new that we haven't seen before. When you see his E, you think of Camille. When you see his Q and his W, there's a lot of champions that have very similar skills that it resembles, and it's just sort of all packing it in. The R is going to be a defining characteristic of him, but I think realistically, all that we need to see is what are his ratios, because basically it looks like a spellcaster Camille is the vibe that I'm getting, and all we have yet to see now is the ratios. So there's really not too much else to say in regards to this champion, because 3 of his abilities out of 5 we've already seen before. We know how they're going to interact with champions. Does he deal magic damage or does he deal physical damage? Maybe I'm just not reading this. Maybe it does say what it ends up dealing. Okay, it does not actually say what he ends up dealing. So this all looks pretty good. We will click the playing as Sylas, whatever. And there's, a very similar approach to Camille. I guess he ended up stealing an ultimate away from Evelyn. and just ends up walking away. One of the big questions that I do have for Hijack is the ratios that are on the normal ultimate, do they become adaptive? Or something like that. For instance, if there's an ultimate that scales with AD, but, Sylas or Sylas is AP, does it end up becoming adaptive? Because if that's the case, then there's definitely going to be some very bonkers ultimates that get absurd ratios that they should not have. So I do think that looks pretty nice. Now, as for the aesthetics and stuff, I mean, it looks like I don't know. It looks like Vi's boyfriend escaped or something, or Vi's boyfriend went to prison. I'm really not quite sure. And then we have Scuffed Illidan. So Illidan is Illidan went to I don't know. Not really quite sure what exactly is going on here, but oh yeah. That happened. So that's really all I have to say. I think, to be honest, aesthetically, I'm not really very fond of him. I think aesthetically he's very unpleasing. As long as his numbers are reasonable, I think that he will definitely be played. Twitch chat is telling me that he's AP, whereas Camille is AD, so obviously there's going to be some there's going to be some options there, because I think that they will actually fulfill a very, very similar role. Obviously, Camille's reach is going to be much greater than this guy's, but as long as he packs a big enough punch, then I'm sure that he'll find his place. If the tank meta starts coming back in, I think that we'll have to see how that ends up impacting him, because if he's reliant on actually having items and whatnot, then he could be gutted by that. For instance, if his base ratios are not really that high, but he has high AP ratios, then it actually makes it, I don't know what that sentence was. It makes it so that jungling is not going to be potentially the greatest of roles for him to go into. So, that's actually pretty much it for this first impressions. There's not a whole lot to go on. This is very different than like Aatrox when he ended up getting reworked, or Akali. It's very different from Kaisa. Seen all of this before, except for the R. So this champion really does feel like the first TCG champion that Riot has released. And what I mean by that is you're basically getting a card that you've seen before with a different name and some different stats, but basically it's the same card. This feels like a Magic the Gathering expansion. I don't even know. Anyways, guys, I hope that you enjoyed the Sylas first impressions. Hopefully his ratios are good and stuff. Enjoy playing him in the jungle.